Our guest is Governor Douglas Wilder, Democrat of Virginia. The governor, who recently withdrew from the presidential race, will discuss state politics, election issues, and his former campaign for the White House. Phone in with your questions and comments. Monday beginning at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Coming next on C-SPAN, a debate featuring the leading Democratic presidential candidates. The program was televised nationally this past Friday by the Public Broadcasting Service. Participants include 5 Democratic presidential hopefuls: former California Governor Jerry Brown, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas, Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa, Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, and former Senator Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts. The debate was produced for PBS by McNeil-Lehrer Productions. It was co-organized by Debates 92, an organization that describes itself as nonprofit and nonpartisan, and one which has been coordinating a series of television debates. The moderators for this event are Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer.
Today I begin a journey of purpose, and I ask you to come with me.
I will work with all my energy, and I will do whatever is necessary.
And with your help, your heart, your devotion, and your efforts, we can...
Are you ready for a president who will turn this country in a new direction?
Will you help me now become the next president of the United States of America?
Tonight, the 5 major candidates for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination debate the key economic issues in the 1992 race for the White House. Good evening. I'm Robert McNeil.
And I'm Jim Lehrer.
Welcome to the second of... Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa, Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska, and former Senator Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts.
The emphasis tonight will be on the economy and other domestic issues. There are no formal ground rules other than those of basic fairness and civility. We have asked the candidates only to keep their answers as brief as possible in the interests of fairness. We will watch the clock to make sure each has an equal chance to be heard over the course of the next 2 hours. There will be no formal opening or closing statements. Seat selection around this table and the order for the first question were determined by lot. Robin?
Gentlemen, President Bush told us the other night how he sees the state of this union. I'm going to ask you how you see it tonight. Senator Tsongas.
Well, Robin, my view is really quite simple. I think what is facing this country is that the Cold War is over, Japan won, and Germany won, and Taiwan won, and Switzerland won. You know, I left Washington 7 years ago, and I live in the real world. And the real world is trying to compete out there in the global marketplace. And it is a war. And the result of our inability to compete over the long term because of the Reagan-Bush policies means a decline in the American standard of living. So I decided to run to rescue this country's economy. You cannot do that with giveaways and tax breaks. I'm not running to be Santa Claus. I'm running to be president. I'm not running to give people benefits and giveaways and lollipops this country in terrible debt simply cannot afford. My job is to rescue this country so people can have a job, the most important thing, so they can provide for their families. That's going to take a real economic battle plan. I've done that. It means truth. To tell people that you have to put your resources into the industrial base. That is the only engine that will drive the economy of this country. So my view is that the State of the Union is very simple. The people are ready to move out, rescue this economy, and I'm running because I think people are ready finally to move in that direction.
Senator Harkin, how do you see the State of the Union tonight?
The legacy of the Reagan and Bush era is really a legacy of 2 Americas, the best of times and the worst of times. For the corporate raiders, the junk bond dealers, for the CEOs with golden parachutes, the privileged few at the top, it's the best of times. But for the 50,000 workers in New Hampshire who've lost their jobs, for the young people trying to get a college education, for elderly wondering about long-term care, for our cities that lie abandoned and in despair. It's the worst of times. What we have, Reagan and Bush said they were going to do more for America, but what we have more of is we have more children in poverty, more families broken, more jobs lost, more drugs, more violence, more crime, less love, and more hate in our country. That is not our America. Our America is an America of hope and confidence and unity, pulling together, working together to build a better country. And I have to disagree with my good friend Paul Tsongas. We are not the problem. The problem is we have the wrong leaders with the wrong policies. We need a new leader with the boldness to throw out the old programs, to bring back the billions of dollars we're wasting defending Europe and Japan, quit giving tax breaks to the rich and the big corporations, invest that money here, putting people to work immediately, building roads and bridges and highways and mass transit. That's immediate. Secondly, invest in education, make our people the best trained. Third, affordable health care for all our people. My program is that program. Build a new America, and I know we can do it.
Senator Kerry, the State of the Union tonight.
Well, you know, it sort of looked like, you know, all hat and no cowboy to me. I didn't hear the president put a call out to the American people. And I think the American people are ready for the truth. I think the American people are ready for somebody that'll level with them. I know it's hard. I know how politicians sometimes get afraid, and I hear fear in the president's voice that perhaps if he told us the truth, we'd get upset. We've got a $399 billion deficit. And we've got the courage, I would say to the American people, to cut our budget, including getting entitlements under control. Secondly, it's time for us to invest in our people. We do need an industrial policy that focuses on the training and skills of our people, but challenges our people to take advantage of it. And take advantage of the educational opportunity. Our gasoline tank is empty because we haven't invested in plant and equipment. Business people are clipping coupons instead of investing in things that create jobs. And we've let the foundation, our transportation and communication system, deteriorate. Third, I think it's time the American people know for national health insurance. I've got a proposal. It's very specific on taxes. It's controversial as a consequence. But it says to us we have an obligation to control costs. The costs are out of control in health care. And I'm not providing a free lunch to anybody. It says to America, we've got to get these costs under control. Otherwise, we're going to break the bank across the board. I know it's tough to take difficult positions. I stood up against the constitutional amendment on the flag. I stood up and opposed the Persian Gulf War. I balanced the budget in Nebraska not by saying no to enemies, that's fun, but by saying no to friends. I supported the pay raise because it gives us the opportunity to eliminate honorary and improve democracy. I understand that the easy road is attractive. It seems to me the president's calling on us to take the easy road, but the path to greatness is the difficult road, and I believe Americans are ready to take it.
Governor Brown, your review of the State of the Union.
The State of the Union, I mean the State of the Union of the people, not just the president's speech. I think people are frustrated. They're angry. They look out at America and they know we're strong, we're the richest country in the world, and yet what's happening? Our automobile industry is declining. Our ports are not competing. Our shipping industry is a shadow of what it once was. Our cities are deteriorating. Our health system leaves out 40 million people. Thousands, tens of thousands are dying and suffering of AIDS. I mean, there's trouble out there. And yet, at the end of the Cold War, we're on the verge of a golden age. I mean, this ought to be the beginning of a renaissance. After spending $12 trillion to beat down the Soviet Union, it's over. And now the world, to a large extent, is at peace in terms of the two superpowers. So what are we going to do? What's the block? What's holding us back? I say it's this whole unreality of politics. It's this inside the beltway. Even the Senator Kerry, who mentions it takes courage to give yourself a $40,000 pay raise. That's part of the whole game of politics here. It doesn't take any courage to put money in your own pocket, to raise money from the interest groups that are getting things from Congress. I think we need real reform. I think we have to reform the politics, the tax code, the industrial policy, our health system. And as we do that, we will be on the, not only the verge, but in the beginning and duration of a golden age.
Governor Clinton, the State of the Union tonight.
Well, I disagree a little bit with Senator Tsongas. I think we did win the Cold War, and we ought to celebrate it. But we're losing the aftermath. The president's failed trade mission to Japan ended with the Japanese Prime Minister saying he felt sympathy for the United States of America. That outraged me, but it pained me too, because The kernel of truth in his remark was not that there's something wrong with the American people. They're working harder today than they were 10 years ago for less money. What's wrong is we are the only advanced nation in the world without an economic strategy. And the sad thing about the President's State of the Union speech, even though it had a few little band-aids I liked in it, things I've been advocating for a while, there was no sense of the magnitude of the problem. We've got a 3-year recession coming at the end of more than a decade of economic decline. And what we need is a short and a long-term strategy to put the people to work again. The President, for example, offers to speed up highway funding a little bit this year. I think we ought to spend the 6-year highway funds in 3 years. It'll create hundreds of thousands of jobs. The President wants to let the middle class ease up on their withholding. I think we ought to have a middle class tax cut made up with a tax increase on upper income people. The President wants an across-the-board capital gains tax that will benefit people with high incomes who don't reinvest in our country. I think we ought to give a capital gains break to people who create new jobs, only those that start new businesses. And there's no provision for small business to get capital. 85% of the jobs are created by them. If you go to education, if you go to health care, if you go to energy, if you look at every single area that this administration has made a recommendation in, it's tepid, stay the course, hope to goodness low interest rates will bring us back. They just don't get it. This country's in trouble, and unless we have dramatic change, we're going to stay in trouble. If we do have dramatic change, we can have the 10 best years we ever had.
Senator Tsongas, let's talk about the economy. You said you want to rescue the economy. Is there something fundamentally wrong with the U.S. economy, or is it just that it's run a cycle? What's the problem?
Well, the problem is leadership. You have a president who's a foreign minister. George Bush finds domestic policy, economics boring.
No, but what is it that the economy is not doing now that it should be doing?
We don't invest properly. There is no venture capital out there. If you're a man or woman with a great idea, trying to start a company and grow that company, there is no venture capital out there. I'm chairman of the board of a small company, just started, trying to get its way through. There is no venture capital, so where's the future? Secondly, there are no incentives out there for companies to invest in plant and equipment the way the Japanese do. Thirdly, the regulation. In American business today, if you think long-term, everything's going against you. The regulations in terms of, for example, director liability, quarterly reports, antitrust laws, all of those things. There is no commitment on the part of the President or the Congress to understand that the government must be a partner in helping American companies to go out there in that battle zone and compete. This is not rocket science. In the world that I live in, it's very easy to understand what has to be done. What's missing, Jim, is the capacity and the will to move in that direction.
Do you agree, Senator Harkin, that the government, the federal government, has the tools available now to fix this economy in very fundamental ways without any help from anybody else, foreign or domestic?
Absolutely. So again, a little bit of difference here with my good friend Paul Tsongas. I really do believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with our economy and the way we're moving. It's called Reaganomics. It's called whatever you want to call it, trickle-down economics. You know, you just give more to the rich and somehow it helps us down here. And again, this capital gains tax cut is the same thing. Any way you cut it or slice it or dice it, a capital gains tax cut favors the rich. 2/3 of the benefits from a capital gains tax cut goes to the richest 1% of the American people, and I say that's wrong. We've had enough of that. Look what it's got us into over the last 11 years. And what Bush is saying, more of the same. And what I hear some of my colleagues are saying, well, a little bit like that. Governor Clinton tonight, he just said it's for capital gains. A couple of nights ago, we were on television, Bill, up in New Hampshire, and you said you were opposed to capital gains. So I'm not certain which is which here.
But I'm against the across-the-board capital gains. I support my Senator Dale Bumper's new business investment credit, which you could call a new business capital gains. If you start a new business, you hold it for 5 years, then you can sell it and pay tax on only half the gain. You can't get that benefit unless you invest in the small business economy. There's no financial mechanism in this country, as Senator Tsongas pointed out, to generate small business capital. You have to do something to try to get people to start to generate small business. So I think that's a very, very important part of what we ought to do, that and significant changes in the banking system. Let me just make one other point. The thing that bothers me is not that people make money. You know, I'd like to create more millionaires than Reagan or Bush did. The thing that bothers me is the way people made money in the 1980s was by pushing paper and laying workers off and bailing out with golden parachutes and raising their pay by more than their workers' pay went up and more than their profits went up, instead of reinvesting in this economy. There will always, in an enterprise system like ours, there are always going to be rich people. What you want is more income equality, and you want people to make money the old-fashioned way by investing in our goods, our products, and our services. And that's what the Democrats ought to be about. This all happened because we've been losing ground to other countries in wealth generation, which drove middle-class incomes down and exploded poverty. And unless we can increase growth and generate jobs, which is what I have been working on for more than a decade, we are not going to make it. And you cannot do it state by state. You got to have a national strategy.
Jim, if I could, I'd like to not leave a misimpression that I believe Tom did. My capital gains tax is not the Reagan-Bush capital gains tax. My capital gains tax, apropos of my comment about the industrial base, is only for investments in securities. So if you invest in a racehorse or real estate or an art collection, you don't qualify. Secondly, it's only if you hold that security long term. So it's patient capital which we are investing. And most importantly, I pay for my capital gains tax dollar for dollar by increasing the tax on the wealthy. So the wealthy who invest in this country do much better. The wealthy who don't invest in this country get hurt.
Governor Brown.
You know, I think, I know something about cutting capital gains. When I was governor, I totally abolished it in just the way that Senator Tsongas is referring to it. But if you look back at the history, the capital gains tax has been raised twice and reduced twice. What you've seen over just the last 10 years is 3 major changes in the tax code. And I've looked very carefully at what Senator Tsongas is proposing and what Governor Clinton are proposing. They're basically small marginal changes that I don't think will have any major impact. And I'm quite confident 3 years later, someone will come along and want to change it. What we need here, if you want long-term investment and saving, you need stability. You've got to take the politics out of the tax code. The tax code is a veritable feast of fundraising, corruption, lobbying, and activity that forces that thing to change because it's such a moneymaker for the people down in Congress. That's why I have a very simple idea. And I know it's radical, and I know a lot of people here won't agree with it, but you just get rid of the taxes that we now have by the federal government and make a flat tax, 13% on unadjusted gross income and 13% on business value added. Now let me tell you what you get with that. You get stability because you're taking politics out of it. You're getting expensing new equipment 100% the first year. You're giving real incentive to long-term planning, which is impossible when you have the situation you have today where it changes. And not only that, you have all these deductions. Every time you take one of these new ideas, you're basically creating a way to deduct and to work the tax code. That means people are going to do things not because it makes economic sense, but because they're going to make some money off the tax code. And that's why lawyers get paid $500 an hour for teaching people how to do that. That's what I want to end.
We're going to talk a little later more in detail about taxes, but let's go to some more fundamental things.
Can I answer that question? Can I have my chance to answer?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you one, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, the problem with this kind of an argument is we're arguing whose capital gains tax is better.
That's just what I was going to say.
The problem that we've had in the 1980s is we've been borrowing and using a credit card to buy everything that we want. And I'm telling you, unless we come to the American people and say, you've got to help us get rid of this deficit. We are borrowing more than we should, and we've got to get that deficit under control. And then you've got to support. You've got to help us increase the amount of investment we're making in plant and equipment. We're woefully short. We're not giving our workers the tools they need. And finally, you've got to say to the American people, you know, we created a middle class in the 1950s and 1960s because we paid attention to poverty. And what's happening is we're not just forgetting the middle class is vanishing. And until we come prepared to invest in our children and make sure in particular women that are out there in the workplace have child care, quality child care, it seems to me that all is going to be lost. I mean, what we do is we wait until we reach a crisis. And it may not occur that there's going to be a crisis. We're sort of dying by inches in America today because our leaders are afraid to come and give us the bad news, give us the real information that we need.
Well, speaking of bad news, some people have suggested that the bad news that the American people aren't being told by you all or anyone else is that the United States, we Americans, have to come to grips with a whole new economic future. That maybe lower wages, maybe a lower standard of living if we're going to compete in the out in the real world.
That's what Dan Quayle wants to do. I mean, he wants Burger King jobs. The fact is, Japan has organized itself, Germany has organized itself, and they are moving in a direction of higher wages. Our government doesn't work with business in order to do that. Business is out there on its own trying to get the job done. I mean, the fact is, we can have an industrial policy that moves this nation in a direction of higher wages, but we cannot do it by just having half a dozen little programs. We've got to come to business and the American people and say, we're going to save our money. We're going to invest on our money. We're going to build the best transportation and communication system in the world. The object isn't just to try to take care of things in the short term. The object for us must be to look out there in the year 2000 and say that we're going to work and huff and puff and get out there and have the strongest economy.
Senator Harkin, would you be in favor, as President of the United States, of looking out at the U.S. economy and saying, okay, the U.S. government is going to save the automobile industry because America has to have an automobile industry, but we're going to give up the steel industry. We're going to go into computers, or we're going to get out of televisions, or what? Is that the kind of control that the federal government should have over the economy to build toward the future?
Not the kind of control, but the kind of investment that we ought to have. And my program, my blueprint to build America is involved in exactly what you said. We have to have a manufacturing base in this country. We've lost over 1.2 million manufacturing jobs in America since George Bush became president. We're losing our steel industry. We're losing our auto industry. We don't build ships any longer. Our aircraft. The second largest earner of export dollars since World War II has been our aircraft. We invented them. We built the best aircraft in the world. Now Airbus is beating us. We have to build the next generation of commercial aircraft. But we're not doing it. We're going to lose it to Airbus. Now we're selling off parts of our manufacturing base to the Taiwanese and the Japanese in the aircraft industry. That's wrong. I say the federal government has a responsibility to invest the resources of this country in building up that manufacturing base.
What resources? What do you
mean? The wealth of this country. Look, you know, there's an anomaly out here. We're the richest country in the world. We're not even number 2. We're the richest country in the world. Well, if we're so rich, how come we're so poor? The fact is we're squandering our money. While we have been putting billions of dollars defending Europe and Japan, they've been doing the very things I've been calling for, building their infrastructure of roads and bridges and high-speed rail, energy systems. And the Europeans right now, the European market has a 17% cap on the number of Japanese cars that can come in here. 17% of their market goes to Japan, no more. The Japanese have learned to live with that. What I'm saying is our federal government had better start sticking up for our industries and making sure that we have a manufacturing base here in this country, and you're not going to do it through capital gains to a few people at the top. We've tried that under Reagan and Bush, and I don't care any way you cut it. If you want to get small businesses started, not capital gains, give an investment tax credit for new equipment and new machinery, but not a capital gains tax credit.
How do you make that kind, with your program, Senator Zongas, how do you save the big industries of America?
Let me tell you that, you know, I live in the private sector. This conversation to the people out there in the private sector having their brains beaten in by the Japanese and the Germans who are searching for venture capital, equity capital, to use the argument industrial-based, manufacturing-based, without giving people the tools to grow those companies. Go out there to the small person in a garage who's trying to build a company and has no access to venture capital. That's not theory to me. That's the world that I live in. So you talk about a manufacturing base, Tom, and not give that.
That's why I called for an investment tax credit, not a capital gains.
I'm for the investment tax credit too.
Well, then
but you
stop
have
right
to
there.
have a company to grow till they get to the point where that is relevant to them. If you stunt them at birth, there is no growth later. And I challenge you, you go out in the real world to small people trying to survive with no venture capital, no equity capital, and tell them what you just said tonight.
Governor Brown.
And see what the response is.
Well, as soon as I get my
you
response, I'll
also,
respond to that.
Paul, when you put this kind of a capital gains, but then you say not this kind of investment, but that kind, you're going to get a lot of, as the tax writers get at that, they're going to have a field day. That's going to be more loopholes because it's a partial, but not the whole thing. Then you throw in the investment tax credit. That doesn't help software people. It says, look, we want you to buy equipment, not necessarily hire people and buy brains. You're picking and choosing in a way that ultimately, by the time it runs through Congress, gets through a very degraded process that will not really be economically rational. And I'll give you an example, something that you're strongly for, the nuclear power industry. That got all sorts of subsidies, and it's one of the biggest users of capital, and it's one of the most inefficient ways of generating energy, and we still haven't even figured out how to clean it up yet. So I would say
don't throw that one at me without giving me a chance to respond.
Well, you have plenty of time to respond.
Quick response. I want to go to Governor Clinton on the building. Go ahead, Senator Zongas, on the nuclear thing.
Are you against nuclear power? Is that what you're telling me?
I have said that conservation in renewables is the way we have to go. I authored the first solar cell amendment in the Congress that passed. In 1983, the solar energy industry named me the Man of the Year in Congress. I have put my effort into conservation and renewables, and your comment gives a very different impression. Conservation, renewables, natural gas, then pick your poison: oil, nuclear, coal.
Governor Clinton.
I just want to make the point. I made it in reference to the fact that when you try these government incentives, many times you're going to turn out that you subsidize something that turns out very bad. And the nuclear industry, in my opinion, is one of those examples.
Let me just address this. First of all, I have a different perspective because I spent most of my time as governor, in the last 9 years at least, working with people to try to start new businesses or help people save jobs and try to generate high-wage jobs, save other jobs, help businesses expand. So a lot of these either-or debates, I think, are false debates. I think let's look at what the competition does. If our goal is to be a high-wage, high-growth country in a very, very competitive world, then you have got to give incentives to people to invest in our country. The problem with all these flat tax schemes is that we had that in '86, and look what's happened. That we tripled the stock market and wages went down because investment was insufficient. You also do have to nurture the technologies of tomorrow. You don't just have to pick winners and losers, but look, our Commerce Department has a list of the emerging technologies. Every other country's got it. The only difference is they're doing something with it and we're not, trying to promote R&D.
And the government should be in there.
Absolutely. Our trade representative has a list of all the manufacturing sectors in our economy which would be competitive in Japan tomorrow. Those are the people who should have gone on the trade mission to press those markets open. This is not an either-or thing. We have to build a small business economy because that's where most of the new jobs are being generated. We have to preserve those manufacturing bases we can, and we have to pierce these new technology areas. We are lousy at doing simple things like export finance help for small business, coordinated market piercing, going from a defense to a domestic economy. The president gave us the worst of all worlds the other night. He announced a $50 billion defense budget cut. I agree with Senator Harkin. It's still a Cold War defense budget. He should have done twice as much, but those $50 billion in people that are behind those money, they're just going to be thrown on the street because they have no strategy to convert from a defense to a domestic economy. These are the things we have to do if we want to be a
Let me answer your question directly. I mean, the question that you asked, I don't know, didn't quite connect with the answers that I heard here, but the question that you asked was, should we organize our government to support steel, automobile, and other critical industries? I answer absolutely.
Yes.
He's answering for me. I appreciate that, Governor. You're saying yes. You're saying yes to lots of people here these days. I'm saying that we need to come and support our basic industries. I mean, that's what Japan does.
But how?
And that's
what does the federal government do to help the auto industry, the steel industry, and all these big industries?
First of all, by making the declaration. By making the declaration, that's precisely what we're going to do. And not be afraid that we got to stand up for American workers. I mean, Europe just imposed a 1.1 million cap on automobiles, Japanese automobiles that could come into Europe. And nobody here in the United States said, oh my gosh, that's going to set off a trade war. But the minute an American politician, as I would, stands up and says, we're going to fight for American workers and try to have an industrial plan that does support automobiles, that says that we're going to win some Cold War battles. We're going to win steel. We're going to win consumer electronics. We're going to win machine tools. We're going to win semiconductors. We're going to win automobiles. And we're going to win aerospace.
But even
it doesn't mean that we are picking winners and losers.
But even one of our industries isn't being well run? In other words, it's lost out legitimately because of competition?
Absolutely not. Japan doesn't protect its industries and says that you're going to be protected and removed from the marketplace. They still have to compete. They're still out there competing in the marketplace. In fact, because they've declared they're going to have an automobile industry, it gives them license to make sure those managers are doing the job they're supposed to be doing, making sure that if we're going to give them preferential tax and if we're going to give them preferential regulatory treatment, as I believe we should if we want to be a high-wage nation, making sure those managers understand that they can't sit around and blame it on the workers. They've got to get down there in the shop floor and do the job they're hired to do.
Senator Harkin.
Again, we have here an argument between whether the government should focus on capital incentives or labor incentives. That's really what the argument is. And quite frankly, what I'm hearing from most of these people, Bob, a little bit exception here, is that they're focusing on the capital incentives. That's what Reagan started. Focus on capital. Tax codes. Jerry's a little bit right. Get the tax code. Manipulate this. It's time for the federal government to start a different program, a fundamental change. And that is to start investing in job-creating activities right now. In every small town I've been in New Hampshire, Franklin, Dover, Littleton, Berlin, I go down the list. In every one, they've got on the shelves in the City Hall plans for street repair, bridge repair, sewer and water replacement, school improvement, all kinds of things like that. I say next year, Let's get a lot of money down to those cities. I've called, I've got it in my blueprint for $35 billion. Get it right down there right away. Start getting those jobs out there. When someone's working on those jobs, guess what they do? They go down Main Street. They buy clothes. They buy shoes for the kids. They buy a car. They buy a new home. That's the difference. I believe in focusing.
That's the New Deal, though, isn't it?
Pardon?
Isn't that the New Deal?
You want to know something, Jim? The New Deal unleashed the greatest creative capacity America's ever seen. What I'm calling for is a New Deal. When Roosevelt came to office, we had 12 long years of Coolidge and Harding and Hoover, the same kind of trickle-down policies that Mr. Tsongas and Mr. Clinton are avowing right now. And all they want to do, they want to manipulate it a little bit. It's a little bit different than Bush and Reagan, but it's the same thrust. I want to say, let's start focusing on people. Let's put them to work, demand pull. Let's start educating our kids, and let's have a national health insurance program. That's bottom up. That's percolate up economics, not trickle down economics.
Okay. I'd like to follow up on what he's saying.
You got to give Paul and I a chance to retaliate.
Okay. you follow up, you retaliate, then I'm going to move on.
Senator Harkin, I think, is moving in the right direction on that question, but I think we ought to put it in a broader perspective. Where is this new wealth going to come from? How can we generate new wealth? Where's the opportunity? It's in Europe. It's the end of the Cold War. It's Russia. It's those Eastern European countries that over the decade are going to want to buy things and sell things, trade. But then when you say trade, what about our ports? They've got a port right in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's virtually vacant. Nothing's going on. President Bush won't authorize the environmental permits to get that thing built. That's a deep water port along with Boston and other places. You start building up our ports.
So what are you talking about specifically?
I'm going to give you that.
Federal government money invested in building up the ports of this country.
Not only just, but no, integrated. What's the issue? Trade. How do you do trade? Not like we did in the Gulf War. 70% of the goods that we shipped over there for that war were in foreign boats. Here's what foreign ships. Look, you first build up your ports. 36 states in this nation have access to navigable waters. You build up, you link it with trains, with rail, you get that connected, and there you've got something, because you have the port, the rail, the shipping, and then you're prepared to enter into the vast growth of world trade.
Let's give Senator
which can
Tsongas,
generate the wealth.
Let's give
right?
Senator Tsongas a chance to reply to the charge that you're just Reagan-Bush continued.
Well, we had our last debate. I was a wonderful person with terrific economic plans. And now I've moved up in the polls, and now I'm Darth Vader. I'm Reagan revisited. Let me give you the example. We talked about towns in New Hampshire, Manchester, Nashua, whatever. I live in Lowell, same kind of town. What happened? We had the textile industry. We did very well, and it left. And we went through decades of decline. And all this other stuff never had an effect until high technology came. A new industrial base, a new manufacturing base. So the difference is, you go to New Hampshire, you build a road. How do you build a road? You borrow the money from the government, enormous debt. At the end of the year, the road's built. The people who build that road are back unemployed. What I'm saying, build a factory at the end of that road that can compete with the Japanese, can compete with the Germans, high wages, high quality products, and they'll be there forever. People making jobs in the private sector to provide for their families, paying the taxes that then allows you to build the road.
Governor Clinton, your reply, and then we're going to move on.
I think we've got to go beyond the gridlock of the last decade, beyond the Republican and Democratic debate, if you will. It's not just a question of dividing the pie differently, and it's certainly not a question of giving wealthy people incentives without regard to what they do with it. I agree with Senator Harkin that if we increased infrastructure to appropriate levels, it would account for about a 20% recovery of our productivity growth rate, and that's important. I think I've raised more money for roads and water and sewer systems on a per capita basis than anybody here. I believe in infrastructure. I believe that you have to increase investment in both the public and private sector. If you don't have an economic, so this is a private sector economy. If we don't have private sector growth, we're in trouble. I believe you have to invest in education and health care and control costs. And I think I'm the only person that's really called for the establishment of a comprehensive lifetime labor market continuing education policy. It is not an either-or thing. And then you have to organize your economy to compete and win with the other rich countries. If you start categorizing this and giving up certain options, I think you're making a terrible mistake.
Let me interrupt you there. You've all mentioned education in one form or another. Let's move this on to education. You've all said in one way or another that is vital to getting the economy going again and growing for the future. Starting with you, Governor Clinton, President Bush also has put a great emphasis on education. You were part of the Governor's Commission that endorsed the goals for the year 2000. So what is different about what you would do? And let's take it piece by piece. First of all, and I'll go around each of you. What would you do differently from what the President is doing to prepare young children for school to meet that goal by the year 2000 of having them? What would you do right away?
Comprehensive maternal and child health, preschool for everyone who needs it. I'd fully fund Head Start. He offered $500 million. I'd offer $5 billion in the first year of a budget, and then give the states incentives to do what we did in Arkansas last year, was to put a lot of state money in to the preschool programs too. Those are the best ways to prepare children. And in addition to that, you need a comprehensive child care system. And those are the things that other countries do. That's what the other rich countries do.
What would you do for these preschool children to prepare them for school?
Well, and not only...
And is $5 billion enough to fully fund?
Well, it isn't just the money. I mean, I think all of us, in fact, support fully funding Head Start. But the fact is, our government's not organized to be able to support the whole family. And I'm proposing cutting the federal government down to size, organizing it by eliminating 7 cabinet secretaries and creating a single Secretary of Human Resources, so that at the community level, I think the federal government's gotten too darn big. At the community level, we can support education and support that whole family and work with them. I've got a different mechanism to fund schools than what we currently have. But let me tell you something. We've also got to come to the children of this country and say, we're borrowing money from you. We've got a $400 billion deficit, almost $4 trillion worth of debt by the time we're done with this. We've got to level the American people and say, we've got to stop borrowing money from our kids. We've got to get our government so that the federal government is the only agency right now that's creating jobs in America, but it's creating jobs only in Washington, D.C. We've got to organize that government and cut it down to size so they can serve the American family.
Senator Harkin, what would you do to prepare children to learn?
Well, I agree with...
President Bush is not doing.
Well, first of all, I agree with the proposals that the Committee on Economic Development made over a year ago. Some of the largest corporations or CEOs got together. Jim Rainier, the head of Honeywell, headed that. And they had one statement in there that I liked. They said that we have to rethink education, that education begins at birth, and the preparation for education begins even before birth. That's where we need to focus. Dr. Brazelton, Terry Brazelton from Harvard, has pointed out that we can raise the IQ of any child by 13 points before the age of 3. That 13 points can be the difference between success and failure. So my 2 colleagues here have spoken to that. Governor Clinton said, maternal and child health care? That's right. That's part of education. Immunizations, Healthy Start programs, WIC programs, Head Start programs. Bush, now he came out the other night and said he wanted to fund some more for Head Start. That happens to come under my subcommittee on appropriations. I fund Head Start programs, that subcommittee. Every budget he sent down for the last 3 years never meets the goals. In fact, if we follow his budget proposals, we'll fully fund it in the year 2050.
So how many children qualified for Head Start are not getting it now, and what would it cost to bring them in?
It would cost about another couple $2 billion to get them in. See, what Bush is trying to do, he's getting the 5-year-olds and the 4-year-olds. We have to extend it now down to the 3-year-olds. And it's going to cost about another $2 to $3 billion in that range to reach down and get those 3-year-olds. But that's where we have to go. And he's not doing it. Let me just say one other thing that I would do that Bush is not doing. In 1980, when Reagan came into office, 1981, the federal government provided about 11.5% of the average school district's budget. That's now down to 5%. I believe the federal government has a responsibility to start getting back into those local schools, providing things like computers, chemistry labs, science labs, the equipment that these kids need to learn for the new jobs in the future.
Just let me go through the preschool children and just see if anybody else has any different ideas here. Do you have any different ideas from what you've heard?
I mean, what's been said makes a lot of sense, and I think it's unexceptional. But look, the problem, we know what the problem in small children, talking about poor kids, a lot of times the family's broken up, single family, single parent family, a lot of stress, pressure. You've got to do something about that. You've got to put an income floor underneath those families that are so under stress. So you got to talk in that economics. An enterprise zone. Take 50 of the hardest pressed areas in America, cut out the taxes to any business will go in there and hire people. Number one. Number two, people who are on public assistance, let them take their government check and turn it into a voucher so they can turn it into a job, and then the employer adds more to it. Anything that will make sure that every American has a living family wage will affect what's going to happen to that child. Then, of course, healthcare system, set some standards once they get into school, and use the technology probably comes later. But the single most important thing is stability for that family.
Do you have any different ideas, Senator Tsongas, on getting young children ready for school?
No, I think my views are very similar, but what I would like to do is raise one other component. What George Bush has not done in this country is to provide a sense of value to learning, that there's not a sense of honor in being a teacher, that kind of thing. I spent 2 years in Ethiopia teaching in a very small village that was extremely poor. They consider it to be a primitive country, but the fact is, in that society, they valued learning. So a child growing up is growing up in an environment where learning has value, it has honor. And in this country, George Bush has turned his back on that. So part of what we have to do, in addition to these very worthwhile programs, is to have a discussion with ourselves about what is really important and bringing some value into education.
Okay, let's move it on now to what you do if, suppose you got the children prepared, what do you do to raise the quality, which seems so urgent, of kindergarten to 12th grade education? What are your proposals, specific proposals to do that? And how does a president do it?
What the president does is to stand up and say to the American people, education equals economics equals education equals economics. So people understand the link between their own well-being and that of the quality of the educational system. So you're talking about standards. Standards for promotion, standards for graduation. You're talking about qualifications of teachers who are going to have to prove that they are qualified. You're talking about requirements in terms of science and math. You're talking about longer school days. Basically, my 10-year-old is in the 5th grade. She's competing with a 10-year-old in Japan and a 10-year-old in Germany. That's the reality, and that's the standard that you have to try to reach towards.
Yeah. Would you agree with teacher competence testing to qualify for a promotion as one of the ways of raising the standards, Senator Harkin?
Well, let me first respond on the issue of what you do with these kids in kindergarten on up. First of all, teachers have to teach. It's been said that the school is a reflection of society, and that's true. The breakdown of our families, the crime, the drugs, the violence, they just move right into the schools. And what we have now are teachers that are besieged with all of society's problems. So what we need is we need to say, teachers teach. We need to provide more school counselors, especially in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Counselors on how to avoid drugs, counselors for self-esteem. I've seen these programs work. If they have the counselors, then the teachers can teach. Secondly, and I'll make this statement right now, as president, I will have a goal that by the year 2000, from kindergarten through 8th grade, no class size over 25 kids in a class. My daughter Jenny is in 5th grade in a public school here in Virginia. Last year, 4th grade class, 35 kids. That's nuts. I'm telling you, no kid can learn in a class that size. This year it's down to 25 at least in her 5th grade class. That's still kind of big. I'd say no more than 20 kids in any class anywhere in America.
What about teacher competency and being tested for promotion as teachers?
Well, again, I leave that up to local school boards, the local school districts. I supported Governor Hunt's proposal to set up a peer review system within the United States, much like the bar associations got, where you have to go in periodically for retraining, where you have to show that you're competent, and then they do their own internal policing within the teachers. I'd rather go that direction rather than having the federal government set up some kind of a test or a form that they have to pass.
Governor Clinton, what do you do to raise the standards in public schools?
Well, I think first of all you have to articulate what the standards are. Then you have to develop some measurements of whether those standards are being met. Then you have to give the schools the support they need to make the changes to meet the standards. And let me just say that in the aftermath of the national education goals, when I resigned as the Democratic co-chair of the governor's panel, Governor Romer of Colorado took that over, and he and Governor Campbell and others are working on this national standards project with educators, the White House and the Senate and the House. We need national standards. The math teachers have given us national standards in math, and we ought to have them in all the major areas. Then we ought to have an examination system that is worth something, that can be given to our students at least the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade, that tell us whether they're learning what they're supposed to know.
But President Bush has adopted that.
He had. Well, he's adopted it. They've been a little bit wishy-washy on it, and we'll see whether they go all the way. But I'm for national standards and the national exam system. The difference between us and Bush is what happens then. Let's look at what you have to do to meet those goals. Number one, most states already test teachers incoming into the profession now, and that ought to really be a matter of state decision. Senator Harkin has a point. There's a Tennessee study that's just been completed which shows conclusively that the best thing you can do for really poor kids in the early grades is to put them in classes with 15 children per teacher. Then do elementary counselor, do comprehensive health, including AIDS and drugs education in the schools. Then give technology assistance where you need it, and you're going to have to retrain a lot of the science and math teacher corps. Over 60% of the science teachers, 40% of the math teachers don't have a bachelor's degree in their area. Those are the things you have to do if you want to lift these standards. One final point, you got to have alternative schools for kids who are in trouble who aren't making it. There are lots of studies now which show that a lot of school dropouts in a different environment, learning differently, can still be successful. We cannot give up on any child. We've got to get to a 90% on-time high school graduation rate.
Senator Kerry, how do you raise the standards in schools, and how does a president do it?
Well, I must say, Robin, I mean, one of the things the president's got to do is tell the American people the truth. I mean, the fact is we're graduating students are going into college that can't read and write. We've got to have incentives out there in our system. We've got to say to our colleges, you've got to have incentives so that our students in high school and junior high and primary are studying harder. And if you're going to have a competency test, which I support in certain terms, you've got to say there's got to be incentives for the teacher. Why give it a competency test unless some sort of incentive backing it up? We also have to have the courage to come to our friends in the Education Association and say it was a mistake creating a separate Department of Education. A mistake. The Department of Education runs education. Earlier, everybody up here said they're for Head Start. But the Head Start programs run over in the Department of Human Services. And nutrition programs, which are vital inside of our schools, are run in the Department of Agriculture.
So Ronald Reagan
if you're trying to do, Robin, job training for the parent, which is a crucial element, it's run over in the Department of Labor. American people have to fit in some special category before they get any kind of assistance. I'm telling you, unless we've got the courage to take this federal government and organize it for the purpose of the American people rather than for the purpose of political satisfaction, we're not going to be able to help our schools at the local level.
How do you raise the standards?
Well, you raise the standards by, first of all, there's an awful lot of bureaucracy. We just heard that you've got to do something about the politics. The politics of education is that everybody's got an idea, gets a categorical grant. And then when you multiply those grants, you have administrators, you have auditors, you have national conventions that deal with those particular types of programs. When you get down to the local school districts, you find that teachers occupy a smaller and smaller percentage of what you're spending your money on. So that'll be number one. Let's get teachers back in the forefront and simplify the amount of aid we're giving them. Don't parcel it out in a lot of different programs. Secondly, I think you're going to have to recognize the fact that there's unequal financial basis. In California, we had a decision by our Supreme Court that said that every school district has to be substantially equal. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has gone the other way under the appointment of a lot of conservative judges. As president, I'd move that decision back either through the Congress or hopefully even through the courts, because when you can get all the school districts in a given state on a more or less equal footing, then they're going to have the resources to pay the teachers and upgrade the performance. And then the final thing I still want to say, that if you really acknowledge what the problem is, you find out it comes down to families under stress. And anything that people watching ought to look for is there anything being said that will lift those families out of their difficult situation, because that's the thing that's hurting standards.
Senator Harkin, you mentioned investment in the federal share in education a while ago. It's typical of this country when it sees an emergency or a crisis, you can use the phrase throw money at it, or you can use the phrase make a very serious investment in the moonshot, in the Gulf War, in whatever you like, in the military when it's urgent. You do that. When the Sputnik went up, is this of the kind of urgency, this educational problem, that there should be a massive federal reinvestment? You mentioned the figures. The bill this year is $236 billion. The federal government pays $13 billion. It's down to 5.5%. It was 11% back in 1980.
That's right.
How much should that be increased, and how much should the federal share be increased to express the kind of urgency that you see in this problem?
Well, first of all, we've got to rethink education again, as the CED said.
Yeah, but how big and how frightening is the problem?
The problem is frightening and it's big, and yes, we have to have the same kind of commitment to it that we had to putting a man on the moon. We have to have a goal, as I said, by the year 2000. We have to set up our goals. I don't agree with President Bush's goals. You know, one special school in a district and things like that, that's just tinkering around the edges. We have to say, as I said, no more than 20 kids in any classroom. We have to make sure we have the proper counselors. We got to make sure that preschool education is available to all.
All that's going to cost money, Senator.
Well, I'm sorry, Robin. I'm here to tell you and to tell the American people you aren't going to get it on the cheap.
Okay.
If you want it on the cheap, you're going to have cheap education.
How much would you increase the federal share of education? If it's $236 billion, the federal share this year is $13 billion, or 5.5%. What should it be? On what order of magnitude should it be to solve this problem?
I'll tell you the goals are where I would be moving towards. First of all, I challenge you or anyone else to show me where in the Constitution of the United States it is written that education has to be funded on the backs of property taxpayers.
Can any of the rest of you give me a figure?
Well, I will. I just wanted to lay the groundwork. We're going to lay the foundation.
Okay.
First of all, we built it on property taxpayers. In the 1970s, there was a movement to get a one-third, one-third, one-third for education, elementary and secondary education. One-third federal, one-third state, one-third local. I believe that's the direction we ought to go in, because I believe that education is not just of a concern to the property taxpayers of a local school district. It's a national concern, and we ought to all be involved.
Senator Tsongas, do you think the situation is of such an emergency that it requires that massive increase of federal investment?
Well, I think you have to...
On a scale of a third, a third, a third.
Where's the money going to come from? I mean, we're talking here about we want to do all these wonderful
Wherever
things.
it comes from, is it needed?
You have to go back to the standards we had before Reagan-Bush. I think we would all agree on that. But, Rob, in the last analysis, if the economy is not growing, there's no taxes to pay for the things that we all want.
But you're all saying the economy can't grow in the long run unless there is a revolution or reformation, or whatever you want to call it, of the education system.
I agree, but you know, education is a vital part of it, but it's only one part of it. What I'm saying is get all these things put in place so you have an economy that's growing, paying taxes, so we can make some pledges that have some rationality in terms of the ability to pay.
The president is the head of the federal government, not a state government, as you've just been, or cities, localities. How big is the problem in terms of what kind of reconsideration of the federal share there should be? Senator Harkin says you should go back, aim for a third, a third, a third.
Oh. Well, I think we should at least aim for returning to the percentage of the budget that we had in 1980. And I think that, but I don't want to go
11%, that would be back to about $26 billion, something.
At least.
Roughly doubling what it is now.
Yes, but let me say how we should do it. We have, first of all, say, what are we going to spend the money on? I just want to make two real quick points. $5 billion for a Head Start. At least $1 billion to begin to set up a national apprenticeship program. Probably another $1 billion to supplement state efforts to teach everybody with a job to read and give everybody with a job a chance to get a GED, hopefully in the workplace. And then providing through, I believe, a National Service Trust Fund, at least another $8 billion to finance college loans. Now, that's how I would begin to spend the money. There may be more. I just want to make one other point, however. In the 1980s, one of our big problems with productivity was that education, government, and health care, we can argue about how we should get them more productive, but they all had very low productivity growth. In addition to doing these things with money, you've got to give more control to the teachers, the parents, and the principals at the school level. You've got to have a national testing system so you can measure whether the decentralized effort worked. And then I agree with Tom Harkin. We don't need star schools. We need the education department to be an instrument of reform in every school in the country. But let's don't get into, as a goal, I would go back to where we were in 80. But let's talk about how much each program is going to cost.
Senator Kerr, I'm just trying to get a sense of the proportion of the emergency in your mind, and therefore
that would be a beginning for me. I'd like to go beyond that.
Well, the emergency, again, for emphasis.
And money is a way of measuring it.
Well, the emergency is American people don't trust that we can spend money at the federal level on education and do much good. And in one way, they're absolutely right. You funnel it through the U.S. Department of Education, and I think you're going to get more of the same. And I just feel very strongly, Robin, that we've got to come to our friends in the education unions and AFL-CIO and other people that are concerned about preserving this independent department that each one of them have, and say, on behalf of our children and our families, let's get this government organized so it's conservative families. I've got a very specific proposal called an educational capital corporation that's funded with a very specific tax on corporations, temporary, that creates a fund that will allow me to go directly to the local level to support very exciting reforms like the Coalition of Essential School. It does cost more per pupil. I mean, Tom's absolutely right. And I'm prepared to spend more per pupil in that kind of a local model if I've got a government that is cut down to size and organized in a fashion that gives the American family and the American taxpayer
you'd make the private sector pay for it.
No, I'm talking about a specific federal contribution. But I'm saying I've got to get this government cut down to size at the federal government level and get it organized. Otherwise, it does not support the whole family today. We are destructive of the whole family in terms of what the federal government itself is doing.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me hear Governor Brown's suggestion of how massive the problem is in quantifiable terms we can understand. You've heard the suggestions here.
Yeah, I mean, this arithmetic by the end of the 2 hours is not going to add up. Everybody knows that. There's too much stuff on the table here, and the deficit's almost $400 billion. So those who are watching will find out it's not real. But, you know, there's something going on in our country. Teenage suicide has tripled the last 20 years, 30 years. Teen pregnancy has gone, skyrocketing. The crime in Manhattan, the highest cause of death among black and Hispanic children under 4 is AIDS. I mean, we have a problem here that despite reforms, and as governor for 8 years, I saw every reform you could conceive of and funded most of them. But nevertheless, the extent of children in poverty has grown, has grown, has grown. We're exiling 10, 15, 20 million people right in our own country. You got to do something specific. And I say something very clear. Create an enterprise zone in 50 of the hardest pressed areas, take out the taxes, and encourage business to go in there and create work where no one's going right now. And then secondly, get these people off of welfare by giving them not their welfare check every month. Say, look, take it to an employer with a voucher, then you've got a job, and over 5 years, then reduce that welfare voucher until it disappears and the person is a productive member of society. Then you add that to the other things that are being proposed, and you'll have, I believe, a real resurgence of educational achievement in the toughest areas that have defied solution for the last 25 years.
All right, let's move on to another area that requires money, and that's health care. Senator Tsongas, the experts say that all of the discussions that you all and everybody else has about health care in the United States always avoids the real issue, which is allocation of resources, rationing or whatever. In other words, we cannot afford to pay for the health care system that our science and medical profession can provide. Are they right?
No. And Jim, as you know, that I'm a product of the American healthcare system. I mean, I'm alive today because of the quality of that healthcare. So for me, this is not some theoretical issue. So I put a group together, and I said you have 2 mandates. One, cover everybody, and secondly, apropos of your question, don't bankrupt the country while you're at it. They started in May, they ended in October, and I put together my healthcare plan. And their argument to me was very simple. We spend 12% of GNP on healthcare. That's a lot of money, more than adequate to do the job. The problem is the money's not being spent efficiently. So we endorsed the managed competition healthcare plan. Now, this past Sunday, the New York Times did an editorial, and they commended Senator Kerry and myself for putting a comprehensive healthcare plans on the table. And they said they endorsed the basic approach of managed competition. So you have the New York Times, Business Week, which is not a liberal.
Well, tell us what managed
magazine.
competition is.
Managed competition basically is this. The government sets the standard. Everybody has a right to health care at this level. Now you have 2 choices.
Through a private system?
You have 2 choices. One, let government do that. Anybody who believes that government can do things efficiently has never been in the city. The other approach, excuse me, is to have the private sector come in and compete to provide that health care. And we ended up with that proposal the same way the New York Times did, the same way Business Week did, because absent the capacity of the marketplace to compete effectively, what you're going to look at is a health care plan that's going to skyrocket in terms of cost. And that's the direction this country is going in. And by the way, George Bush's program was an outrage. What he said the other night, he talked about a tax credit. Bob Kerry and I disagree on health care, but we both agree that what George Bush put on that table, he just wanted to say something about health care. so he could say he's talked about it. But that health care plan, to give somebody a credit, how do I as an individual have the capacity to go out and negotiate with a major provider? The cynicism of George Bush on health care is outrageous.
So, well, I'm just going to ask Senator Kerry, your plan is basically a government-mandated plan. It does not go through the, well,
my plan is national health insurance.
Right.
I mean, it simply says that we have an obligation to control the cost and we'll budget it and have caps at the national level. Everybody is included. Eligibility is not as a consequence of where you work. You break that link between eligibility and employment. And instead of having the federal government run it, you have the states manage the program. It is the only way that you can put the power in the hand of the individual patient out there and have comprehensive care for everybody.
But how do you manage costs under your plan?
You manage costs by budgeting. You'll have an environment where politicians will be accountable, and we'll have to make a decision at the national level. You'll ask me, if we had national health insurance today, you would be saying to me, Senator, how much do you want to spend on health care? We cannot do that today. And I want an environment where we know for certain that you can control those costs and get everybody in, and then allow the states to manage. You still have private care.
Now that's going to lead to rationing and allocation, is it not?
We have rationing and allocation now. I mean, I'd love to hear the president say we're going to have, don't demagogue on capital gains, he said. And then he demagogues on national health insurance. He doesn't wait in line. He has socialized medicine at Walter Reed. Doesn't complain about that. John Sununu's got socialized transportation. That doesn't bother him. The fact of the matter is American people out there need to know with certainty, there's growing uncertainty of elderly people and women that are pregnant with pre-existing conditions that don't have health insurance. You can eliminate it all with one stroke of the pen. Plus, say this.
What would that stroke of the pen say?
That stroke of the pen says that we will have national health insurance, we will guarantee health care as a right, we'll break the link with employment, we will fund it with taxes. A bit controversial, I might point out, but we will spend less money. Not more money, we will spend less money. Furthermore, and it's what I said at the start, and I think you got to have the courage to say this will not only control the costs, but this will contribute to deficit reduction as well. We will sell $35 billion worth of bonds this year, Jim, to pay for our doctor and hospital bills. That makes no sense at all. Mine is a pay-as-you-go proposal. It wraps its arms around the two biggest entitlement programs in America, Medicare and Medicaid, and says we're going to bring them all into one system. We're not going to make Americans go prove that they're poor enough or old enough or, like I did, get blown up in a war in order to become eligible for veterans care. If you're an American, you're eligible. And you have a requirement at the state level to participate in making decisions about how to manage it. Making decisions about how to manage that care, and will deliver care in a much lower cost, much more efficiently. The individuals will have the individual Americans will have the opportunity to manage their care.
Does that make sense to you, Governor Brown?
In some parts it does, but I think there's, again, a certain unreality about all this. Senator Kerry has a bill. I don't know how many co-sponsors he has on it, but since President Truman proposed this in 1949, people have been talking about it. It's been in the Democratic platform. Nothing happens. And I believe one of the reasons is the medical and the insurance interests give $30 million every election cycle to keep it the way it is. As governor, I signed some bills to let people compete with managed health care plans, health maintenance organizations. There's 13 million people in California that are now in them. But unless you can control the politics, then you can't control this cash cow that they're milking. And it's not because of technology, it's not because of aging, and it's not because of malpractice. This system...
It's corruption, you're saying.
I'm saying it's corrupt and it's rigged by the way the people can order up an unending amount of medical bills to the tune of $80 billion a year.
Can I respond to the reference?
Sure.
Well, I mean, if you were in the Senate, I suspect you'd be on a bill for national health insurance. I mean, the reason that I'm the only co-sponsor is it's tough. I mean, it is controversial. There are taxes attached. And I'm telling you, it's not a free lunch. I'm saying to the American people, we have an obligation to face this rising cost of health care. It's a powerful economic issue. We spend 13% of GNP this year. It'll be 18% in the year 2000. If we pass national health insurance, which I promise we'll do in the first 100 days, I'll guarantee that if I win the primary in New Hampshire, that Congress is going to get a message. And Congress will come around. I promise you that if I win this election, we'll pass national health insurance in the first 100 days of my administration.
Which is the biggest problem? Let me ask Senator Harkin, which is the biggest problem about health care? The 37 million Americans who don't have it, or the people who are underinsured, or the fact that it's too expensive and we can't afford it anymore? The bill's going up too fast, too high.
Well, first of all, I appreciate what my good friend Bob Kerrey is saying about raising taxes, but
Are you still good friends?
I wish you'd be more forthright and tell the people exactly how much taxes.
I've been telling them how much taxes.
$246 billion of new taxes in the first year under the Kerry proposal. A 5% increase in payroll taxes. That's what it does. We're spending $817 billion this year on health care. We don't need to spend any more. And if Mr. Kerry or anybody else comes to the American people and says, well, we're going to raise your taxes and take it in, and then we'll give you something back, hang on to your wallet, because that's not going to happen. I'm saying we don't have to spend any more, and we don't have to tax anymore. What we have to do is reshape the health care system. First of all, squeeze out the waste. I chair the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds these health programs. I keep coming across all these examples. $700 foam mattress that Medicare is paying for costs $29. That goes on and on and on. Cut that out. Secondly, cut the administrative costs. 24 cents of every dollar in health care is for paperwork. One electronic form, nationalized form, save us up to $20 billion. Reduce unnecessary medical procedures. 1 out of 4 medical procedures unnecessary. Another $20 billion. Let's go to lower cost providers like nurses, home care, National Health Service Corps that I've been trying to raise funding for. A more equitable bearing of the cost. Businesses that are not paying their fair share ought to belly up to the bar and pay their fair share. And last...
But maintain the current system.
No. The current system's got to change. But the last and the most important of all, and none of these people are talking about it, and Bob doesn't talk about it, prevention. We have got to build, as our health care system, preventative health care. Maternal and child health care, $1 saves 3.
It just isn't true that I don't talk about prevention. In fact, the matter is...
I don't see it at all.
There are powerful incentives to prevent illness, sickness, and disease.
Not in your
proposal. Absolutely are, Tom. And look, I know this thing cold.
Oh, you sure do.
I've been working on this thing for 3 years, and when you represent accurately that we will be paying $240 billion,
$246 billion
more in taxes. We will be paying $240 billion less in premiums.
I mean, what will we get that we don't have now? What will we get for your
We will get the certainty of knowing that care is there. And we will have an environment at the state level, not at the federal level. The federal government is increasingly involving itself in health care decisions. It makes almost 40% of the health care expenditures today. I want the states to manage it. I want the people to be able to put in place incentives to prevent illness, sickness, and disease, which they will have. We'll be able to bring resources to the community level that we currently cannot do because we've got a budget deficit at the federal level, and all these ideas of putting more money in the health care system simply are not going to work. We have got to say to the American people, we have an obligation to budget all of our health care expenditures and pay for it. Yes, I'm prepared to say to the American people that yes, we will pay for it with taxes, but the average taxpayer out there will pay less. Now, Tom and I, with our big fat salaries, we'll pay a little bit more because I believe in progressive taxes. But for an average American worker under $40,000 a year, they'll pay $500 less. And for somebody making $25,000 a year, they'll pay $1,200 less. American people should not be fooled with this tax argument. The fact is, we can spend less, Germany spends less, Canada spends less, and they spend less, Jim, because their politicians are required to be accountable on the overall cost, and we're not.
Governor Clinton, which one of these two men do you agree with?
Well, again, I have a little bit different perspective, because I've been paying all these health care budgets as governor for so many years, and I just finished a year as the head of the governor's project on health care. It's a very complex issue. I must have talked to hundreds, literally hundreds of people before I put out a position paper on it. But let me say that first, every one of them is better than what George Bush says. I don't agree. Well,
Which one do you like? I mean, you can't say you like them all. Which one do you like?
I like mine, but I mean, I think...
What is yours?
I believe that we ought to go, like I agree with Senator Tsongas, we ought to take on the insurance companies and have insurance reform, but we ought to do it with an employer-based system, with a government alternative for small business and people with no insurance. I agree, however...
That's the kind of the play or pay.
Yeah, but the difference between me and the Senate bill is, or any other bill, you've got to have dramatic insurance reforms. If you don't stand up to the insurance companies, you're not going to save any money with it. Then second thing you have to do is have a dramatic plan to reduce the cost of paperwork and bureaucracy. This is a very inefficient system. Third thing you have to do is to stop fee for service. If the more you spend, the more you make, and you have no control over that, the system will continue to spin out of control.
What do you mean stop fee for service?
I mean, you can't just, I don't believe that, I think what I want to do is get more people in healthcare networks. I don't like the word managed care because it implies you're taking stuff away from people. But you talk to...
Fee-for-service means I go to a doctor and I pick my own private doctor on my own private hospital. You're saying you don't want the
I think people should be able
to have that choice?
I think they should be able to do it, but they should also have the freedom to enroll in networks where they pay a yearly fee for being in it, so that you take some of the incentives out for spending more money by the providers. I also believe that I agree with Senator Kerry on this. You have to have some agreement at the national level and at the state level to keep the cost of health care in the aggregate within inflation. And finally, you got to do something about drug costs. They are not subject to regular competition, and about the distribution of unnecessary technology. Now, these are the kinds of tough decisions that everybody's going to have to make. The Bush program doesn't do any of that. I believe that the Tsongas proposal in financing is more realistic, and we can get there quicker. I believe that it is important to maintain some competition, but everybody's got to have access to a comprehensive health care network and a centralized billing system and absolute dramatic reductions in the paper trail that is engulfing hospitals.
Senator Tsongas,
but listen, wait a minute, one final thing.
All right.
Any one of these plans, first of all, is going to be modified as we go along through Congress. Bob Kerry's right. If one of us gets elected president, we'll have national health care for everybody. And secondly, I want to say any one of these plans, 5 years from now, will save $100 billion over the way we're going.
Including Kerry's plan?
Absolutely.
No, first of all,
but in the beginning, it's cost too much money. It's 6 taxes,
first
not
of all,
one.
it is not true that if one of us elected, I mean, I've got a very specific proposal. I'm fighting for national health insurance. Paul's fighting for managed competition. A very specific proposal that are different. We have differences of opinion. I'm saying the American people need to hear the truth. Unless we budget health care, unless we come forward and say, yes, it's going to be, I believe, a taxpayer system instead of a premium-based system to liberate the American worker so that we can focus on job training and education and the whole family. We've got to be prepared to take a stand. I mean, look, I voted for the pay raise a little bit earlier ago, and it's been criticized a lot in this campaign, but I'm prepared to defend that. Jerry, I am. We eliminated honoraria when we did that.
Well, you didn't have to take the honoraria.
And I didn't call...
Senator, you didn't have to take the honoraria.
That's exactly right.
That form of legalized bribery was something that the individual senator took it or not, okay? And you took it. Now you gave yourself a $40,000 pay raise in order to give up $30,000 in honorarium. Now you explain that one to me.
You and I disagree on this.
I disagree very strongly
All right,
with you.
but let me tell you...
As governor, I fought a pay raise 8 out of 8 years.
You and I at least have an honest disagreement. And I'm telling you, I defend it and I stand up for it. But Governor Clinton called David Obey and said, gee, you guys did the right thing, and then you run a negative ad on us up there for voting on it. You're trying to have it both ways. You've got to take a stand. Yes, you and I disagree on it, but at least tell the American people what you're for. At least tell the American people what you're prepared to fight for.
What did Governor Clinton do that upset you? What did he do?
It's not just on this issue.
Right.
I mean, earlier on the health care proposal, he doesn't answer the question. Well, we're all sort of for national... Not true. He called up a very important member of the Congress, David Obey, and said, you guys did the right thing raising your salaries. And then, when he sees it's unpopular, he runs an ad and says, well, I'm against it.
Governor Clinton?
I didn't do that. And I think Congressman Obey has now modified his statement based on a clearer memory of what happened. That's not what I did. David Obey is a gutsy guy, and unlike the Senate, he didn't raise his pay at midnight after the Washington Post had gone to bed. And I ran into him, and he said it was hot, and I said, well, you know, you always do what you think is right, and I complimented him from being an upfront, open guy instead of sneaking around at midnight and doing it. I did not say that I agreed with it, first of all. I mean, you know, give me a break. I just didn't agree with it. Now, secondly, I have said exactly what I do. Read my program. Just because Bob doesn't have just $240 million worth of tax, there's 6 or 7 taxes in there. There's not just one tax. And I'm afraid what happens is if you lead with a tax increase in a system where the costs are out of control, you will never get control of the cost. That is why I don't agree with that.
Let me ask a cost question of Governor Brad. Governor, is it possible to treat health care like you would treat any other kind of allocation, the way Governor Kerry or Senator Kerry is talking about? In other words, you say it's so many billions of dollars are going to be spent on health care, period. And you got to make it go right, because the system now, as you know, is based on need. It's not based on a certain amount of money.
I'll tell you what, you said, can you treat the medical spending like anything else?
Yeah.
Like anything else that has $30 million of campaign contributions buying the Congress every 2 years. Anything like that, it'll come out the same way. We got to ration greed here, not need. And until you break that up, I don't agree if either one of us are elected, we're going to have a health care system.
Why not? Why not?
Because the same characters are in place to keep paying the money to block any real change. This
They're going to block if one of these other people.
How have they done it for 40 years? President Carter had a cost containment that was blocked. I mean, look, there's a certain unreality. We're talking about great. Senator Tsongas has something, and Governor Clinton has something else. The fact of the matter is that whole gridlock political system down there isn't going to move. It isn't going to move unless you challenge it frontally. And that's the whole basis of my campaign. That's the thing that gets people upset in the Washington establishment here, because I'm saying, look, it's
Does it upset you when he says something like that, Senator Tsongas?
I mean, you got 5 people here in midlife crises trying to make their point about what health care should be. Now, look, we all have our positions. And I'd just like, if I could do quickly 3 things. One, Tom, you said there's no prevention in my health care plan. Page 3.
Not very much. I mean, it's sort of an afterthought. An afterthought.
It's not an afterthought.
It ought to
you
be the basis. It ought to be the basis.
There's no prevention in mine and
Bob's
there's all
kinds of prevention in everyone, but
right.
it's sort of not the basis.
So you changed your mind because I called you on it.
No, I didn't. I said it's a very small part of it, and you know that.
That's not what you said. You said that neither Bob Kerrey or Paul Tsongas has prevention in their health care
plans. We'll go back and roll the tape and see, but I'm saying that there's very little.
The second point I would make is that Bob and I have very different approaches, and we feel strongly. And I commend Bob for the work he's done in putting it together. But the fact is that someone's going to have to come along and give some judgment. The New York Times said that Bob's proposal has a pivotal flaw, and I quote, because it stunts competition, and that the beauty of my plan is it provides competition. Bob, I served in the Senate for 6 years. If you had a health care plan that covered everybody and saved billions of dollars, your life would be in danger. Your colleagues would trample you to co-sponsor the bill. Half of them would be claiming that you stole the idea
because they're
from
afraid
them.
Of taking, Jerry's absolutely right. They're afraid and quake in their boots at the possibility that the insurance industry will come down hard on them. And I know, and Paul, the insurance industry is very big in Nebraska. And they're a bit upset, to say the least, with my proposal. And the reason that people don't get trampled is because there's great fear that if they make that proposal, that somebody's going to come down hard on them. But I'm telling you, Paul, with great respect for managed competition, I mean, I've looked at the proposal, I examined it, I've talked to Dr. Enthoven. It's a terrific proposal, but I just don't feel confident that it's going to control the cost and that it's going to allow us to direct the resources at the state level like people want them to do.
Senator Harkin, can we move on to a slightly different area here? And
before we do, can I mention one thing we've left out totally in the health care, and that's the AIDS crisis. I mean, there are 1 million to 1.5 million people that are HIV.
You did mention it earlier.
Well, but I think it ought to be at the top of the national health care agenda. The president barely mentions it. You've got 1.5 million people dying of AIDS. You've got good research projects that are not even being funded. You've got people who, while we're waiting for one or the other of these health care plans, can't get covered. They're suffering, and no other country, at least developed country, does that happen. I think the president's got to stand up and say, look, we've got a plague on our hands. We've got to talk about it, how it's transmitted. We've got to warn people, and we've got to pay for the money so that we don't abandon people who are suffering and dying in every community in America.
Point taken. Senator Harkin, the point is made about all of you some of the time, and most of you all of the time, meaning you Democratic candidates, that you want to do all kinds of marvelous things. You want to improve education, you want to reform the healthcare system, you want to revive American industry, you want to rebuild roads, bridges. In other words, you want to transform the country and do all the things you claim are not being done now. But you all seem to want to do it painlessly. Mark Shields, the analyst on our program earlier this evening, said you're all for ouchless, painless solutions. You want, to quote him again, he said, like President Reagan, you want to pretend that you can lose 40 pounds on a diet of chocolate fudge sundaes. Now, you've just been beating up on Senator Kerry because his health program was going to involve new taxes. Where is the pain in all of what you were proposing to transform this country? Where are the costs to the American?
Are you a masochist?
No?
Are you a masochist of some kind? I mean,
you were the one who said a moment ago, Governor Brown, that none of this was going to add up at the end.
That's because of the corrupt money
well,
that
I'm asking the question of Senator Harkin at the moment. How does it add up, and where is the cost in all this? Are you saying that one of you wonderful men can become President of the United States and transform the country, and with the huge deficit there is, not have to raise the cost to the American taxpayer at all, simply by readjusting taxes a little bit?
Well, quite frankly, I believe a lot of that can be accomplished that way, because look at the past. Since World War II, and this is why we're at an opportune time right now. This is why the time is right. for what I'm proposing in terms of building America. Since World War II, the taxpayers of this country have given of their tax dollars to the tune of $12 trillion to defeat communism and win the Cold War. And I agree with Governor Clinton and disagree with Mr. Tsongas. We won. In the last 10 years, the taxpayers have spent $1 trillion on military spending. The Cold War is over. It's behind us. The Soviet Union is defeated. Communism is dead. Now let's start shifting our focus. Let's quit building those B-2 bombers. Let's start reducing.
The President announced the other night that he would.
No, he's going to buy 5 more. He's going to buy 5 more than what we've already authorized.
He's going to quit after 20.
Oh, that's what he says, yes. But that's even 5 more than what's authorized right now. He's not reducing the strategic nuclear warheads, though. He says down to 6,000. Why do we need 6,000? How about down to 1,000? Let's restructure our defense industry.
Let's go more quickly to the point, perhaps, so the others can come in. How much could it be cut and how quickly to get the kind of peace dividend that you think the victory over in the Cold War justifies?
I've called, and in my blueprint that I can show, like Paul shows his book, my blueprint for rebuilding America, that over 10 years I would reduce military spending by 50%. That would be $420 billion in 10 years. I would take $280 billion of that and put it into a fund for rebuilding America. I'd take $140 billion of that and apply it to deficit reduction. It is, yes, a bigger cut than what President Bush is calling for. But President Bush is still fighting the Cold War. I'm sorry. His budget is still a Cold War budget. Now, is that going to be somewhat painless? There's going to be some pain in that we have to shift our industrial focus in America. But I don't believe the pain has to come at the expense of the working people of this country. The pain may come in the expense of taking some money out of Germany. Our taxpayers this year are putting $17 billion into Germany to defend the Germans from the Russians. And guess what? The Germans are paying the Russians stationed in Germany. That's nonsense.
Is having the defense budget realistic, do you think, Senator Tsongas?
Well, Robin,
in the time that Senator Harkin
I'd like to, if you would indulge me, to go back to your original point. You said that your analyst, Mr. Shields, said that we are all engaged in painless activities. The fact is, if you look at...
He didn't say that about you.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, that's the fundamental basis of my campaign, that I will tell you the truth.
Cold showers and root canals, I think.
Wait a minute. Let me finish.
Yeah.
The fact is that George Bush in the White House said that George Bush's speech would be the defining moment of his presidency. It sure was. He gave away everything. You take every special interest group, you give them a tax break. If you own a Cocker Spaniel, you get a tax break under the Bush plan. The result of that is that you have the revenues that are here, expenditures that are here, and they drain the Treasury. That's what George Bush did. We are the alternative. We are the only alternative this country has. So this is a defining moment. This debate is a defining moment. So what are we for? We're, for example, as George Bush, not me, some of the others, for a tax break for having children. Okay, I have 3 kids. I get money from the federal government for having 3 kids. The government is broke. Where is it going to get the money to give it to me? They're going to borrow the money. Who are they going to borrow the money from? My kids.
Okay, so what would you do?
Well,
and where would the pain come in your, cost in your proposal?
One, you shift money from defense into these other programs. That's right. Number 2, I pay for my programs. My capital gains tax, as I said earlier, I pay for by raising the tax on the wealthy. I'm the only candidate here who will have a tax on gasoline, 3 to 5 cents every year to pay for infrastructure and for mass transit. The final thing I would say is this. My last amendment, the United States Senate, was a budget freeze. And it passed. So you can talk about all these giveaways. Somebody, and it's going to be me, is going to have to get out there and say to the American people, I'm not Santa Claus. If you want Santa Claus, I'm not your candidate. I know where we have to go. You can walk downhill. It's very comfortable. But at the end, you're in the rut. What I'm saying is it's more difficult to climb uphill and climb a mountain. But at some point, we Democrats have a responsibility because Bush has abdicated that responsibility to do something which is responsible. So the middle class tax cut, 97 cents a day. All the pollsters say that's how you appeal to the middle class. Do you think I didn't want to do that? Don't you think that I yearned to say to people, I'll give you a tax cut? But I didn't, because it is not responsible. We talk about the next generation. George Bush and Ronald Reagan have added $3 trillion of debt to our children. How is that responsible? We are the alternative, and we're going to do the same thing? No, not this candidate.
You're the one who started this by saying it isn't all going to add up at the end.
Right.
And it's all unreal. Where is the cost?
This whole discussion is unreal, because until you challenge the corruption of the establishment in Washington, nothing will happen.
Okay, you become president, and you're the miracle man who transforms the country. What is the cost of your program of transforming it?
I'll tell you. Let's talk about three things. I've listened to Paul now a lot, and his partial capital gains tax, I don't see as the salvation to the country. I'd say three things. On defense, I've looked at it, and I can give you year-by-year budgetary projections that could show a $700 billion saving between now and in the next 10 years. A 10-year program of a 50% reduction, cumulative savings, $700 billion. That's a saving.
How is 50% 700 billion in yours, and it's only 460 billion in yours?
No,
if you accumulate it out to the year 2002, it'll equal 700.
No, mine's cumulative too. Your math is a little off.
Well, no, my math is based on a
So you cut it in half and get 300 billion more than Senator
Maybe
Harkin
we cut
does?
it a little faster. It depends on how quickly you start the reduction. And if you have reduced, I don't want to get into. I'll make them available. Anybody wants to call my 800 number, we'll tell you exactly how you can get 700 billion.
What are your other 2 points?
The second point is that the tax amnesty, I believe, could recapture 1%.
What is a tax amnesty?
You tell people who've, in the underground economy, who've evaded, who've not paid their taxes, that if they come back in, you work with state, local, and federal, which has never been done before. So you actually give a forgiveness to people. Those who are on the margin, come on in, and we'll work out an installment plan. There have been about $8 trillion in taxes paid in this country in the last 6 years. If we could get 1% of that, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 billion. So I am...
in a year?
On a one-time, first-time saving. So you're getting something in the neighborhood of 50, 60, 80 billion dollars. That's a second saving.
Point.
The third thing is that I recommend that you eliminate the gasoline tax, the Social Security tax, all these federal taxes, and replace them with a simple, stable, flat tax that's fair, that will give stability over time, that will give that longer horizon for investment and saving that every economist says is needed if we're going to produce the productivity that we need.
If you reduce all taxes to 13%, surely you drastically reduce the total revenues to the U.S. government.
No, that's not true. If you apply it on the value added, the business value added and personal adjusted gross income, it equals about $8 trillion. You multiply something about 12.5%, and you will come out at what was collected last year.
But Nigeria, in the last debate, you said about a flat tax, then you said, well, then there would be an exemption for your house, and then there would be an exemption for...
Three deductions only. Rent, charity, and home mortgage. That's it.
And then it goes through Congress, you get more and more
Governor
exemptions.
Clinton,
but you got to start somewhere.
Governor Clinton, you're one of those about whom it's frequently said that all your programs sound painless. Where is the cost of you as president? What would it cost the American taxpayer to have you as president and reforming all the things you think need reforming and improving the infrastructure, education, health, everything else?
First of all, I noticed that most of these people who are calling for pain are people who endured no pain in the 1980s. They're columnists and commentators who are quite comfortable, and they're going to be comfortable no matter what happens. To say that there was no pain in this country for the last 10 years is not to have lived here. Middle-class people worked harder, their incomes went down, their taxes went up, poverty exploded, and they were victimized by stupid policies. Now, I'm for a middle-class tax cut, but I make it up in painful. If you think it's easy to raise money in high-income places by telling people you're going to raise their income tax to pay for a middle-class tax cut, But it is a down payment on fairness. Do I want to work in over a period of years a children's tax credit? You bet I do. Every other one of our competitors interested in raising children has a children's allowance.
Tell us about your changes in the tax rates. Now, you said you're going to raise taxes on the better-off individuals. What is your highest rate, and when does it begin to apply? The highest rate at the moment is 31%.
It would go to 38 above $200,000.
Above $200,000.
On that portion of income.
On that portion.
How about
Now,
for single people? What does it say?
Now, let me finish, though, how it
Is that for a household, or is that for an individual?
For
the wage earner.
Per report. Income.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me, and it could be jointly filing, but still be 38%. If they jointly file, they're above 200,000. Now, let me walk through this. I have laid out a very detailed set of defense reductions, twice what the president recommended. That generates in 5 years from now, $90 billion a year peace dividend, $100 billion total reduction over present levels. I have outlined a very clear way.
I don't follow that. $90 billion a year
it would be
$100 billion.
No. It's $100 billion less than current levels of spending, $50 billion more than the president has recommended cutting, gives you an annual peace dividend in year 5 of $90 billion a year below current spending. Then I have recommended that we cap current consumption expenditures of government in the aggregate, not program by program, by increases in personal income. Reduce the administrative cost of government by 3% a year. That gets you a minimum of another $75 billion a year. And I have outlined a plan to change the way we're handling banks in trouble so that they don't spill over into the deficit. If you do that, you reduce the annual deficit by $100 billion a year once the S&Ls are paid off. That will leave you enough money to pay for every spending program I have recommended and still have some to pay against the debt. Now, I don't see that there's any intrinsic merit in kicking the brains out of the middle class. All these people are saying, get tough, get tough. The only thing Paul Tsongas has recommended that I haven't is a 3 to 5 cent a year gas tax increase, and that may be a good thing to do. But I'll be darned if I understand why we should do that without giving some offsetting tax relief to people whose incomes have gone down and taxes have gone up.
So it's no new pain, net pain, it's just transferring the pain from the middle class to the better off people?
And let me also say, no one takes any change seriously in government who comments on these things unless there's some money involved. If you read the detailed, specific changes I have called for in the way we do our business, change is not easy. Change is very hard. I've been working on it for 11 years. It's not easy to do.
Senator Kerry, we've heard some of the pain that you would offer, at least in terms of initial new taxation to pay for your health care. What else would be, where else would it cost Americans to elect you president for what you envision as the things that need to be done?
I mean, it's going to cost you a little bit in the size of government. I mean, I am going to take the size of the federal government down by 25% over the next 10 years. I'm consolidating 14, that's correct, 14 cabinet secretaries down to 7, and unifying as well by reducing the number of oversight committees on Congress by 75%. It's tough. I mean, I've said to my friends in education, my friends in labor, my friends in agriculture, my friends in the Veterans Administration. But let me back off here a bit. I mean, yesterday, they announced 7.8% unemployment numbers in New Hampshire. I mean, it's a real crisis going on in this country in unemployment. People are out there that are really hurting, and every single one of us wants to make sure that of all the people that get unemployed, that George Bush has a chance to go bone fishing full-time in January of 1993. And the way that we're going to do that is with persuasive proposals that put American people back to work. Yes, national health insurance. I look forward to a chance to go in head-to-head with George Bush in November '92, talking specifically about national health insurance because I believe the American people want it. I did deficit reduction when I was governor of the state of Nebraska, not by saying yes to my friends. That's tough. I mean, to say no to your friends is difficult. I reduced the deficit in the state of Nebraska by viewing it as a moral obligation, and I've laid out the details of what I would do. But the American people want to go back to work, and all of us are trying to describe in much more persuasive fashion, by the way, than George Bush, exactly how that ought to be done.
First, you wanted to make a point.
Yes, I did want to make a point on this. First of all, on both Governor Clinton's and Senator Kerry. Governor Clinton has called for this tax cut, but again, it's still the same kind of tax cuts we saw under Reagan and Bush. Under Governor Clinton's proposal, if you make $20,000 a year, you get a $105 tax cut. But if you make $100,000 a year, you get $850 tax cut. That's what's wrong. That ought to be topsy-turvy. If you're going to have a tax cut, I happen to agree with Paul Tsongas. This tax cut's nonsense. Absolute, sheer, utter nonsense.
Let Governor Clinton answer that.
The lower your income, the higher the percentage the tax cut is. Obviously, if you have a higher income, if you get a 10% tax cut on average, even though it's 6% at the upper levels, there are more dollars in it. But if you look at it, what we tried to do was to attack, by and large, the people whose incomes went down and whose taxes went up in the 80s. So how can we quarrel with the proposition, and it's just a down payment? I mean, how can you quarrel with the proposition that we ought to create a climate of tax fairness in this country? When we started the last decade,
It's not fair.
when we started the last decade, we were 8th in the world of the 22 richest nations in income equality. We are now dead last.
Why is it not fair?
You couple that with his capital gains tax cut, and you still have the same unfair tax system we have right now. I just want to point something out here. Here's Financial World, a magazine that said this was in April of 1990, which states are well run, the 10 worst, and at the bottom is Arkansas. Now, I think that's because of the same kind of economic policies that we're hearing espoused by Governor Clinton here tonight.
Can I answer
One of the
that?
10 worst run states in the nation under Financial World.
Those boys in New York didn't do such a hot job of running anything in the 1980s that wrote that. And they were just dumb. They didn't even understand our budgeting system, and they later admitted that they didn't understand our budgeting system. The next year they did their rankings. We refused to answer because it was intellectually vacuous the way they did it, and they moved us up 7 points anyway. And you notice Senator Harkin didn't say that. They moved us up 7 rankings when we wouldn't even answer the thing. Let me just say this. My state has the toughest budgeting system in the United States of America. I am under a legal obligation to balance the budget year in and year out during the year. And we're in pretty good shape because of that. And in a decade in which we got no help from Washington, my folks were having to work in one of the poorest environments in the country. They did unbelievable things. Our job growth rate outstripped the national average. Last year we were 7th in the country in job growth, and we produced 11 balanced budgets and 11 modest surplus. And those guys didn't know what they were talking about. And I'll bet you anything Tom Harkin hadn't read the analysis.
I'd like to go to Governor Brown here.
And your state is 50th in workplace safety. So what kind of jobs are you creating?
One at a time. One at a time.
Can I answer that?
Just quickly answer that. 50th in workplace safety.
I've got it right here. Here, you want to take a look at it right here. 50th in workplace study.
I bet you've read a report on the study.
Right
we can't get them to send us the study.
50th
But
in
I will
workplace.
say this. On the front of the study, it said this workplace study, safety thing that he keeps talking
Study
about.
ranks Arkansas last in job
That's right.
safety.
You read a newspaper article. The study says this study does not measure the effectiveness or adequacy of state laws or policies, period. And in 1989, the last year we have statistics, Arkansas had fewer workplace accidents per hour's work than Iowa or Nebraska.
Governor Brown.
Robin, before we go to the next one, I want to just follow on to something. Bill Clinton over here is the front runner, and he has this record. And
I'm glad to be attacked by my opponents again. This is kind
all
of
this
refreshing,
attention.
guys.
I just want to point out that study that they have on workplace safety, California's #1. And we're talking about jobs. During the time that I was governor, we were able to create almost as many new jobs as there are people in Arkansas or Nebraska, about 2 million. A lot more than George Bush has been able to create in the whole country. And we're only talking about one state. And we did it in part, maybe in major part, because we took California from the 3rd highest tax state on the day I was inaugurated. And when I left, it was the 24th state. Okay, so that's a record. A lot of people don't even know about it. And I want to talk about where you go from the future. One of the things that made California grow was innovation. We became the world leader in alternative energy. This country lacks that innovative spirit at every level. Our ports are not up to the new world trade that we're going to have to do. Our maritime fleet commercially is in ruins. It's nothing to compete. We don't even use Panamanian ships and Liberian ships, and we don't have an interconnected high-speed rail system that will allow us to gear up for the tremendous opportunity. The Cold War is over, and we can have a golden age if we have a spirit of innovation and the kind of clear investment incentives that I've been talking about with the tax.
Gentlemen, yes, go ahead.
The issue on the tax cut is very simple, and that is, where did it come from?
You're talking about the middle class.
The middle class, 97 cents a day. Does anybody believe that 97 cents a day is going to stimulate the economy?
Well, that was $1.
You have John Kenneth Galbraith, who's the icon on the left. He's opposed to it. Alan Greenspan on the right. He's opposed to it.
That means we should support it.
That means that we must be right.
All right.
that Bill Clinton and I are right on that issue.
Well, the New York Times is against it, and every editorial I've ever seen is against
Again,
it.
3 for 3. If those 3 or 4 are against it, then it's right. I mean, a dollar a day may not mean much to you and I, Paul, but a dollar a day is a lot of money to somebody out there making $15,000 a year. And both Bill and I get that money by going to upper income people and say that in the 1980s we reduced your taxes, and nobody complained about that. It's time to raise them a little bit to provide a middle-class tax relief because those people are hurting. They deserve it.
I deserve to get an answer to that. Let me tell you something, Bob. I raise the same tax you do. I raise the same tax you do, the same number that Bill talked about. The difference is, what I say to the middle class is, I'd love to give you 97 cents a day, but I want to give you a job. I want to give you a job. I want to give your neighbor a job. I'm not going to pander to them. It costs $30 billion.
You describe it as pandering.
Let me finish.
You describe it as pandering, and I do not accept that.
Let me finish. $30 billion. You had a choice. I had a choice. You could take $30 billion and give it to the middle class, 97 cents a day. The other choice was to take your $30 billion and build the engine that drives this economy, the manufacturing base that you talk about. You chose not to do that. So I take my $30 billion by raising the tax on the wealthy, a targeted capital gains tax, held long-term, incremental investment tax credit, Head Start, extension of unemployment benefits. That $30 billion is meant to drive that engine so people can have a job.
I do the same thing, only I do it nationally. That's where I get my $35 billion.
Let's change directions again here slightly. Governor Brown, we've listened now, we've heard differences on issues among the 5 of you. What to you distinguishes you from these other 4 men?
Number one?
Most distinguishes you.
First and foremost, I had the experience of being the chief executive of the largest state in the country. It is equivalent, that economy in California is equivalent to the 8th largest country in the world. Just in our medical budget alone, we spent $5 billion a year. I mean, all the problems we're talking about. National service, we started, the California Conservation Corps. 50,000 young men and women have gone through it. Wellness and prevention, first state wellness commission in the state. We did it there. Pioneering and controlling toxics, the best environmental record anywhere in the country. So I think there's a record there. For the future, I would say the essence of what I'm doing here is reform. Reform of the tax code, reform of the politics. I'm only accepting...
More so than any one of these other 4
Well,
men.
I'm only accepting $100. I don't take the $1,000 that Paul likes or the $5,000 that Senator Harkin over here likes. I'm saying only if the people themselves adopt this campaign as their own will it go forward. We live or die on the support of the regular, average Americans out there who want to send a check. And in that respect, I'm almost tempted to use my 800 number, but everyone gets so upset. But I just... Give it to him. I just believe it.
Do whatever you want to.
The reason why this is important is because it's allowing people who are not part of the inside to access power. That's what it's all about. And people who do want to access a campaign that they control, call 1-800-426-1112. Call it and join it and tell me what you think. And I do think money is the issue. There is an unreality about our discussions because unless we can shift away from this tremendous dependency of $500 million every 2 years that goes to elect Congress, that keeps the incumbents coming back at a rate of 90%, then most of what we do will end up frustrated and not happening.
Senator Harkin, what about you? On some of these things, you're in agreement with others here, and others you're in disagreement. But if you had to name one thing about yourself that you feel deep down inside makes you different than these other 4, what is it?
I believe my 17 years in the Congress shows that I have fought for working people, that I have gone up against the powerful interests like the AMA that's always been after me every time I've been up for election. And I have got a record of accomplishments that I'm proud of. The Human Rights Amendment that I offered in 1975 formed the basis of human rights in our foreign policy. My consistent opposition to Reaganomics and trickle-down economics. I told you tonight, the last time I was in this studio was 11 years ago, when I warned the American people that they were being put on a credit card by Reaganomics when he passed that tax bill that I voted against. The Americans with Disabilities Act. I grew up with a brother who has a disability, and I saw how he was discriminated against all his life. So I saw a problem there, and I said, so many people in our society are discriminated against because of disabilities. So I went to work as chairman of that subcommittee, authored that bill, sponsored it, we got it through. Bush signed it into law a year and a half ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That defines me more than anything else. I saw the problem, solve it. Secondly, it's a bill that includes people, it brings people into our society, gives them independence and gives them hope. That's what defines me, and I believe that's what makes me different from these other people.
What makes you different, Senator Kerry?
Well, first of all, I think I can beat George Bush. And I've beaten
And these, you don't think any one of these others could?
I'm speaking for myself.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right. I mean, I beat a Republican incumbent for governor in 1982 in a very Republican state. I beat a Republican in 1988, an incumbent senator, by 17 points when George Bush was beating Michael Dukakis by 20 in Nebraska. I've been a governor, I've been a senator, I've been a business person before that. I believe I can take it to George Bush in the fall. Look, I don't know what it's like to be unemployed. I've never set an unemployment line. I've never actually experienced the pain that many Americans are going through right now. But I have been flat on my back in a hospital for 8 months at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital after Vietnam. And I know what it's like to feel betrayed and feel pessimistic and down and out. And I believe I can go to the American people and bring the best out of them and get them off their backs again and get them to work again. Furthermore, I mean, I think I can take it to George Bush on the area of foreign policy. The other night when he was talking about in his State of the Union, he said communism is dead. I mean, it's the same thing as Gerald Ford's premature liberation of Eastern Europe. Now, that comes as a shock to the People's Republic of China and the people in Vietnam and the people of Cuba to hear that communism is dead. His foreign policy is flawed. It runs back and forth and it's all over the place. Furthermore, though I believe our defenses need to be cut, and it probably ought to be $220 billion in 7 years in real terms from what we are today, but I believe in making sure that we've got the defenses capable of preventing a war out there in the future. Making sure that we honor our highest obligation as adults who are unlikely to have to fight a war. Make sure with our military, economic, and diplomatic activity that we win the peace that sits in front of us right now.
What makes you different, Governor Clinton?
I think the life that I have lived for the last 13 years, 11 of them as governor, having to keep vision and hope alive under very difficult circumstances with the wonderful people in my state, always constantly working for change. We need someone as president who can get things done. Someone who has worked to get and keep jobs in a tough global economy, who has worked to educate children and solve social problems, and always being on the cutting edge of change, never defending the government, but always seeking to improve it. And, you know, I grew up in an ordinary American home. I had a lot of opportunities just because I was an American. And I have devoted my life to trying to give that back to people. And I am sick and tired of living in a country where people are on the defensive, where a lot of people think the next century belongs to someone else, where the Japanese Prime Minister says he has sympathy with us. And I have tried to articulate both a broad vision, a unifying vision, an energizing force in this campaign, and a very specific plan for what I would do as president. And I have a record that indicates that I can work with the Congress and work with the American people to get this country going again. And I think that is a unique experience in this election.
Senator Tsongas, when you look around this table, how do you see yourself as different than these other folks?
Well, Jim, as you know, you were my neighbor. 1984, I left this city because I had cancer. And I never thought I'd ever get back into politics. That was the least of my concerns at the time. So I went back and I spent 3 years defeating cancer. And what I learned during that experience, and Bob's had a similar experience, I learned to think differently. You know, I never knew my mother because she had tuberculosis and they could not cure that. And I had a 2-year-old, as you know, and my concern was that she would never know her father. And so I spent that time thinking about my mother and my father and the responsibility of the generations. So that's how I think. I got into this race before any other Democrat did by far. George Bush was at 91%. Why did I do it? You think I don't know that being Greek from Massachusetts is not a problem? Because there's purpose to what I'm doing. The positions I've taken, okay? This is not an election year document. This is meant so I can govern. So my view, very simply, is I'm going to tell you the truth. because that's the purpose, the obligation of my survival, so that I can run this country. I want a mandate. I have not come out for all these things that are so attractive. I'm going to give people the truth. So my view is, this is where we have to go, fellow Americans. I know how to take you there. And if you wish to go there, I would love to be your president, so that what they get from me is truth based on my sense of purpose, why I'm doing this. I think that's the difference.
Governor Brown, some people suggest that the issues are only part of it. The positions that they've heard from you all tonight are only, there's another element always in deciding who to vote for, and that's character. How would you define that, and how should people judge not only you, but your four colleagues here?
Well, I think you've hit right at the critical issue, character, and ultimately that's the judgment people have to make. You have to look at our records, you have to listen to us as we're talking, determine, do you believe what we're saying? Is there a capacity for commitment? What are the values in our past life? My own background, I originally had entered into study for the priesthood for 4 years, then I left and went into politics. My whole interest in life, in some ways, is, I wouldn't say it's a missionary zeal, but there is always a reformist element that even in politics with the compromises, as I fall back from it, I always want to return to those basic principles. And I think people then have to judge, is that there or not? And I would say the character is a question of the record, and I think people have to make a feel, almost an intuitive judgment. What kind of a person is that? I think that's what the way these elections really, after you get through the other stuff.
Is that legitimate, Senator Kerry?
Yes, absolutely legitimate. I mean, look, I think the people of the United States of America need to look at our records, need to examine our ideas, need to examine where we've come from. And one of the things that I feel sometimes to a fault is a great sense of urgency to act. Sometimes causes me to come out of my seat a bit more than I ought to and get a little bit strained at the leash. But it's based upon having the government save my life. There's lives at stake out there. Furthermore, I sometimes tend to be a bit more optimistic than I should, believing that America can do the impossible. And it comes as a result of a very specific personal experience. I was in a recovery room in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital in '69, and they'd just amputated my leg. I was lying flat on my back, and against the walls, my dear mother and father now departed, and I asked my mother to come over, cruel as I was at the time, and said, "Mom, how much is left?" And she looked at me dead in the eye and she said, "Bob, there's a lot left." Well, that's the way it is in America. There's a lot left in us. I mean, I make no apology for it. I feel enormously optimistic about the United States of America's character if we will level with the American people and attempt to bring out the best in them.
Governor Clinton, what's your view of the character issue?
I think it's an important issue. I think the American people have been making judgments on it for more than 2 centuries now, and more than half the time they've been right. I think in a president you want someone who is strong, who will try to stand up for what he believes in, will fight for it, try to do what's right, and will feel the pain and the potential of the American people, and will do them proud. Life, it seems to me, is a constant struggle to the end of one's days for deeper and deeper and deeper understanding and integrity and conforming what one really believes to what you're doing. And I think the American people get a sense of whether they look at you and they say, that person would stand up for my country. That person cares about my family. If somebody offers that person a chance to compromise my interest and the interest of ordinary Americans for some personal gain, he won't do it. If somebody offers that person a chance to increase his popularity by abusing power, maybe even by sending people to die, he wouldn't do it. But if he had to make all those tough decisions, then he would. I think that is the general feel of the character issue in a presidential campaign.
Can you tell those kinds of things, Senator Harkin?
Yes, I believe so. I believe the American people have enough wisdom to basically look into our souls and see who we are and what we're made out of. They have to understand where we come from. We've all had traumas in our life. Paul has, Bob, Bill, Jerry, we all have. I've had my share too, we all have. The real pertinent question is to ask, have you forgotten your roots? What are your values? Tell me your values. Because I think values mean a lot to the American people. And I think we've been too reticent of late to talk about our values and how they were formed. Again, my father was a coal miner. Didn't even have an 8th grade education. My mother was an immigrant, and I went one time to her country, Slovenia, visited the house she was born in, a little stone hut with a dirt floor that my mother was raised in. She had no formal education. My folks raised 6 kids in a little 2-bedroom house that still stands in a town of 150 people. But growing up in that family and in that small community, I learned certain fundamental values. Hard work. We didn't have any money, so I had to work hard. Being frugal, I had to save money. Personal responsibility, taking care of myself and taking care of my family, because that's the only way I made it was because we had a strong family after my mother died. Faith in God and love of our country. And I'm not embarrassed or ashamed to say that. And last and most important, a care and concern for those less fortunate than ourselves. Those are my values, and I believe those are the fundamental values of decent, ordinary Americans all across this country.
Senator Tsongas, what's your view of the character issue? I mean, is that a legitimate thing? The people who watched you tonight, the 5 of you tonight, is there something they could see and should see and act on if they were going to vote one way or another?
It's the ultimate issue. Ultimately, it comes down to what we are as people. I mean, what makes us. It's not just arms and legs and heads, but what's inside. And, you know, we battle. But the Democrats should be proud of this group.
Why?
Because there is character here. Who are we running against? George Bush. Want to talk about character? Can you imagine that any one of us would have gone from a Planned Parenthood position to anti-choice to placate the Reagan right? Can you imagine any one of us
You think
here?
that's the only reason he did it?
How can you be pro-choice and then go anti-choice because you're now trying to run with Ronald Reagan? Let me give you an example, too. Pro-civil rights, and you use Willie Horton. That's a long journey, Jim. Give you another example. The environmental president, okay, trying to sabotage wetlands. George Bush has no core. There is no principle. George Bush is not willing to sabotage for his own benefit, and that State of the Union message, with the, as the Washington Post said, the lollipop budget, people who make those journeys in terms of their ideologies do not have character in the way that you asked the question. And though I may disagree with my colleagues here on particulars, every person here, in my judgment, has more character than the person we're running against.
Governor Brown, do you agree with what he just said about President Bush?
That he doesn't have character?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly thought he doesn't have a compass that seems to be taking him in a direction that I think we can feel confident about. I thought the Horton commercial showed a lack of character. I think the way he basically got us ready for war without involving Congress in a straightforward way. I think there are questions, but you know, as
you've attacked particularly the senators for their wage, I mean, their pay raises, and taking money. I mean, is that a character issue to you? Is that a political issue?
You know what it is? It's an issue about the whole way the system works. And you know, even right now, it's part of the unreality. I mean, what is the biggest character issue out there right now? It's the stories on Bill Clinton, isn't it? And whether or not there's an issue there or whether there isn't. And whether or not it betokens a respect for women, or every time a woman, wait a minute, that's what everybody's thinking about. Yeah. They're looking at that. Yeah. And whether it's legitimate or not. And I think that that raises a question.
It's not legitimate, and they ought to ease up on it. What's legitimate is our issues, our ideas, our agenda. That's what's legitimate in this campaign.
Well, every time a woman makes a claim, she's always viewed as lying or a bimbo. And I think we got to face up to the fact that that does reflect some values that are not representative of what a lot of women in this country feel.
Robin?
Do you want to reply to that?
I think I've said all I need to say about that.
Okay.
And I think the American people got more of me and my wife and our life together than they ever thought they'd get in this primary process.
Okay. Well, Governor Clinton, Senator Kerry, Senator Harkin, Governor Brown, Senator Tsongas, thank you all very much. That winds up tonight's Democratic candidate debate. This is one of a series of 7 debates coordinated by a nonpartisan organization called